When Jaleel White walked up to the podium at Malcolm-Jamal Warner's funeral, nobody expected what came next. His voice shook, tears welled up, but it wasn't just grief that poured out. It was something deeper, something shocking, a truth about their complicated past, hidden struggles, and a final confession that left the entire room frozen. This wasn't just a tribute, it was an emotional bombshell that changed everything we thought we knew about their relationship. Malcolm-Jamal Warner's passing sent a shockwave through fans of The Cosby Show and the entire entertainment world. Known for his iconic role as Theo Huxtable, Malcolm wasn't just a TV star, he was a symbol of Black excellence, resilience, and artistic depth. So when news broke of his sudden death, it left an emotional crater. But what happened at his funeral took things to another level entirely. Jaleel White, yes, that Jaleel White, the actor who made Steve Urkel a household name, showed up and delivered a tribute that no one expected. What started as a eulogy turned into an emotional roller coaster filled with untold stories, unresolved tensions, and heartfelt revelations. How were these two iconic actors really connected behind the scenes? What pain had Jaleel been carrying for years that only came out during this final goodbye? And why did some of the guests leave the ceremony in tears, not just from grief, but from shock? You won't believe the layers of this story. Because what Jaleel revealed that day wasn't just about loss. It was about forgiveness, rivalry, missed chances, and a bond that went far deeper than anyone in Hollywood ever imagined. And this is where it gets really interesting. To the average fan, Malcolm-Jamal Warner and Jaleel White were two 90s TV legends who carved their own separate lanes. Malcolm was the calm, level-headed Theo Huxtable, the ideal big brother, the kid with all the potential. Meanwhile, Jaleel White's Steve Urkel was the quirky, annoying, but lovable nerd next door. Two very different vibes, two very different careers. But what most people never knew was that behind the scenes, these two stars shared a deeper, more complicated relationship that spanned over 3 decades. It all started in the early 90s, right after Jaleel shot to fame with Family Matters. He was barely a teenager and already being called the next big thing. But he didn't feel like it. Why? Because he was constantly compared to Malcolm-Jamal Warner. Producers, directors, the press, they all pitted them against each other. Malcolm was the golden boy of Black sitcoms, and Jaleel was often viewed as his awkward, over-the-top counterpart. According to insiders, Jaleel once confided to a close friend that no matter how big his success got, he felt like he was chasing Malcolm's shadow. The competition wasn't just public, it got personal. There were rumors of tension during awards seasons, events where the two would see each other but barely speak. One source even claimed they had a fallout at a BET after-party in the mid-90s when Jaleel overheard someone saying, "He'll never be Malcolm." That moment stuck with him. It haunted him. But here's where the story takes a sharp emotional turn. Years later, when both actors had matured, grown spiritually, and reevaluated their lives, something shifted. Jaleel, in a rare podcast interview just a year before Malcolm's death, mentioned a brother in the industry he wished he had made peace with. Fans now believe he was talking about Malcolm-Jamal Warner. So when Jaleel showed up at the funeral, dressed in black but carrying decades of unspoken grief, everyone could feel the weight he brought into that church, and what he did next absolutely stunned the room. The atmosphere inside the small Los Angeles church was quiet but heavy. You could feel the sorrow lingering in the air like smoke. Friends, family, co-stars, and loved ones of Malcolm-Jamal Warner gathered not just to mourn a man, but to celebrate a legacy. Most expected the ceremony to follow the typical script: eulogies, scripture, tearful tributes, and gospel hymns. But nobody expected him, Jaleel White, to even show up. As the service began, heads turned when Jaleel quietly entered through a side door, dressed in a fitted black suit and dark shades. He didn't walk in like a celebrity. He walked in like a man carrying years of regret on his shoulders. Some people gasped quietly, others looked confused. Wasn't there tension between them? Hadn't they been distant for years? Jaleel didn't sit near the front. He quietly slipped into a pew in the back. But what happened about 45 minutes into the service left the entire congregation in shock. After the final eulogy and a moving gospel song played in the background, the pastor stood up and said, "We have someone here today who would like to say a few words, a man who knew Malcolm in ways many of us didn't." All eyes turned. Jaleel White slowly rose and walked to the front. The silence was deafening. He took off his sunglasses and stood before a casket that held not only the body of Malcolm-Jamal Warner, but all the unspoken conversations they never had. And then his voice broke. "I should have called you, man." His opening words sent chills through the audience. Jaleel didn't read from paper. He spoke from the heart. He talked about the years of quiet competition, the jealousy he once felt, the industry that always wanted them to be enemies instead of brothers. But most of all, he talked about regret. "I wasted years being bitter, not because of you, Malcolm, but because I couldn't handle always being compared to you. I let that comparison steal what could have been a real friendship. And now, I'm too late." Several in the room wiped their eyes. Some openly sobbed. He went on to say Malcolm had reached out to him more than once in the last 5 years. He had seen the texts. He had ignored the DMS. "I thought I had time," he whispered. What really hit people in the heart was what Jaleel said next. "You weren't just Theo. You weren't just a child actor. You were a man who inspired others to stay grounded when the whole world tried to tear them down. You inspired me, and I wish I had told you that when you were alive." The church stood up and gave Jaleel a standing ovation. Not because he was famous, not because he gave a polished speech, but because in that moment he was raw, he was real, he was human. And then he broke down. He walked to the casket, placed his hand gently on it, and whispered something that only those close to him could hear. A reporter near the front said he mouthed the words, "Thank you for carrying me, even when I didn't know it." That moment didn't just shift the energy in the church. It transformed how people viewed both of these men and their hidden bond. What many fans never truly understood was how Hollywood didn't just create two young black stars. It pitted them against each other from the very beginning. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the charismatic Theo Huxtable from The Cosby Show, and Jaleel White, the unforgettable Steve Urkel from Family Matters, were often portrayed by the media as rivals, even though neither man ever asked for it. It wasn't personal, it was systemic. Behind the scenes, casting directors, executives, and agents whispered one dangerous phrase over and over again: "We already have our black kid." You see, Hollywood had this unspoken rule. There could only be one black teen star at the top at a time. So instead of celebrating both boys as talented in their own right, the industry placed them in a cage match of ratings, media comparisons, and fan wars. Malcolm was praised for his smooth coolness and how he balanced intellect with charm. Jaleel, on the other hand, became a household name for playing the nerdy, high-pitched, suspenders-wearing Urkel, a role that brought comedy but also intense typecasting. But the competition wasn't always just between them. Producers would compare their Q scores, ratings data, and fan mail. Publicists would pitch one star for a role and name-drop the other as less of a fit. Studio insiders would casually say things like, "He's the next Malcolm-Jamal," when talking about Jaleel's early rise, igniting a quiet resentment even before they had the chance to know each other as men. And imagine being a teenager, barely able to vote, and constantly reading headlines like, "Who's the better black TV star, Theo or Urkel?" Both stars suffered in silence. While fans were laughing, both boys were struggling behind the scenes. Malcolm once opened up in an interview, years before his death, saying, "I knew what they were doing. We were both talented, both hungry, both trying to survive. and they kept pushing this invisible wall between us. For Jaleel, the struggle was different. He spent years trying to shed the Urkel image, but producers only saw him as a punchline. Meanwhile, Malcolm was respected as a serious actor, even directing episodes of The Cosby Show as a teen. That only made the comparisons sting deeper. The irony? They had far more in common than anyone knew. They both dealt with overbearing media coverage. They both felt trapped in roles that didn't reflect who they were in real life. And they both tried, quietly, to break out of the boxes Hollywood built around them. But when the cameras turned off and the fanfare died down, they were just two black men trying to be seen and trying to heal. Many insiders believe the unspoken competition robbed them of a beautiful friendship that could have uplifted them both through the darkest years of their careers. By the time Jaleel realized this, it was too late. Malcolm was gone. For many fans, Malcolm-Jamal Warner's sudden and tragic passing felt like a punch to the gut. A drowning incident? It just didn't make sense. He wasn't a reckless man. He wasn't known for wild behavior or putting himself in risky situations. So how could someone so grounded, so intelligent, so loved, suddenly disappear beneath the surface and never come back up? But those closest to Malcolm had quietly noticed the storm brewing inside him. In the weeks leading up to his death, sources close to the actor reported seeing a change in him. He had grown distant, quieter. The once warm, wisecracking Malcolm became more introspective, often staring off into space in the middle of conversations. Some friends described it as a deep sadness, the kind you can't shake, even when everything looks perfect on the outside. One source, who asked to remain anonymous, said Malcolm had told them, "Man, I feel like I'm still trying to prove I matter. Like the world moved on from Theo and I got left behind. That's the side of fame fans never get to see. The long, empty days after the applause stops, the constant doubt, the silent fear that you've peaked, and no one cared enough to notice." Malcolm had tried to reinvent himself over the years, directing, acting in independent films, performing spoken word, even releasing jazz poetry albums, but the industry that once loved him seemed to keep him at arm's length. And then came the final trip. Malcolm had been staying near a private beach resort for what was supposed to be a restful escape, a break from the pressure, the media noise, and what insiders say was a serious dispute with a major studio that had shelved a project he'd poured his heart into. The night before his death, several staff members at the resort reportedly heard loud arguing coming from his room. A heated phone call, shouting, then silence. Surveillance footage later showed Malcolm walking alone, barefoot, down the shoreline at sunrise. He stopped several times, looked out at the waves, then kept walking. That was the last time he was seen alive. Hours later, a frantic call came from a hotel worker who found some of Malcolm's belongings, his phone, a towel, and a journal page, near a rocky edge of the water. His body was recovered later that day, and the initial ruling was accidental drowning. But here's where things take a darker turn. The journal page reportedly had a single, haunting sentence: "I don't know who I am without them watching me." Was it a final message, a cry for help, or just a moment of emotional release that meant nothing at all? We may never know for sure, but one thing is clear: Malcolm was hurting, not from drugs, not from scandal, but from years of being seen and yet invisible, praised and yet forgotten, loved and yet misunderstood. His death shook Jaleel White to the core. And the way he found out, through a late-night phone call from a former co-star who simply said, "He's gone, man. Malcolm's gone." What happened next would change Jaleel's life forever, and finally force him to confront not just Malcolm's death, but everything he never got to say while his so-called rival was still alive. For decades, Jaleel White was known as the goofy, lovable, nerdy Urkel, a role that both made his career and, in many ways, haunted it. But behind the laughter, behind the catchphrases and suspenders, there was a young black man quietly drowning in expectations. And it wasn't until Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death that Jalil's carefully constructed facade completely crumbled. The day after the news of Malcolm's passing broke, Jalil posted a brief, cryptic message on Instagram. "There are no reruns in life. Tell your people you love them before it's too late." Fans didn't understand what he meant, yet. But just 48 hours later, during a scheduled appearance on a live podcast that was supposed to promote a lighthearted 90s sitcom reunion, everything changed. What started as a nostalgic trip down memory lane spiraled into one of the most raw and emotional confessions Hollywood had ever seen. Jalil, live unfiltered, began to tremble as the hosts brought up Malcolm. He paused. He looked down. Then he said it. "I hated that man, and I hated myself for it." The entire room went still. He continued, "We were kids, just kids, but the world pitted us against each other. Cosby Show versus Family Matters, Theo versus Urkel, Black Cool versus Black Nerd, and I couldn't take it. Every time Malcolm landed a new gig, I felt like I failed. And when I finally saw him struggling, a small part of me, I'm ashamed to admit this, felt relief." Jalil's voice cracked. He shook his head. You could see decades of pain flooding out of him all at once. "I should have reached out. I should have called him when I saw the signs. But I was too busy trying to prove I was bigger than Urkel. Now he's gone, and I'll never get the chance to tell him that he inspired me, that I respected him, that I envied his peace." This wasn't just a moment of grief. It was a full-blown emotional collapse, a release of guilt, rivalry, resentment, and regret. And in that moment, Jalil became something more than a sitcom star. He became real to his fans in a way no character ever could. People all over social media lit up with reactions. "This is the first time I've ever seen Jalil White this vulnerable." "We forget these stars carry trauma too." "Malcolm's death opened wounds we didn't know were there." But Jalil wasn't done yet. At the end of the episode, with tears streaming down his face, he looked into the camera and said, "If you love Malcolm, if he meant anything to your childhood, honor him by checking on the people who look like they're doing fine. Because I wasn't, and he wasn't." That clip alone racked up over 10 million views in 48 hours, going viral on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Celebrities like Keke Palmer, Tyler James Williams, and even former Cosby Show co-stars reposted the video, offering their love and support. And that moment, that single, unfiltered breakdown, became the spark that launched something far bigger than just grief. Jalil was about to take on Hollywood itself in a way no one expected. Jalil White's emotional breakdown wasn't just a fleeting viral moment. It was the spark that ignited a reckoning. After decades of being typecast, ignored, and discarded by an industry that profited off his childhood image, Jalil had finally reached his limit. Malcolm-Jamal Warner's tragic passing ripped open an old wound, and instead of letting it fester, Jalil decided to fight back. Within days of that explosive podcast, Jalil announced the launch of the Child Star Reclamation Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at advocating for mental health, legal protection, and financial literacy for former child actors, particularly Black and brown children who were used by Hollywood and then left to fend for themselves. In his live press conference, Jalil did not hold back. "You cheered for us when we were 12, you laughed at us when we struggled at 25, and then you forgot about us at 35. But we didn't disappear, we were surviving in silence. That ends now." He called out the very networks that once built empires off the backs of child actors: ABC, CBS, NBC, even streaming platforms like Netflix and Hulu. He accused them of profiting from decades-old reruns without offering a single royalty to the kids who made those shows household names. "Y'all still watching Family Matters on Hulu every week? You think I'm rich from that? I don't see a dime. but the network execs, they're living in Beverly Hills off my sweat from age 12. This triggered a massive wave of support from other former child stars who had similar horror stories. Kel Mitchell from Kenan and Kel Tatiana Ali from Fresh Prince Raven-Simonet, who once revealed she didn't own the rights to her own name for years, and even Orlando Brown, who, despite his struggles, spoke up saying, "They used us up like batteries." And then came the lawsuits. With the help of a pro bono legal team and donations from fans and fellow celebrities, Jaleel and his team filed a class action lawsuit against multiple networks, calling for back pay of residuals from reruns and syndication, access to therapy and wellness programs funded by the network's legal reform, to update the outdated Coogan law, which currently offers only minimal financial protection to minors in entertainment. But here's where it gets even deeper. Jaleel revealed that before Malcolm died, the two had been exchanging emails, trying to launch a joint podcast called From Kid to Cast Off, where they'd expose how the industry treats black male stars. They had written the first episode's script. Malcolm died just 3 days before they were set to record it. In one leaked email, Malcolm wrote to Jaleel, "The world thinks we made it, but we're still bleeding. Let's tell our stories before someone else controls the ending." Jaleel's foundation published that email in full, and the response was explosive. Protect Child Stars began trending on Twitter. Activist groups joined forces with Hollywood unions. Even Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson reposted it, writing, "This is how we build legacy, not with silence, but with truth." Suddenly, Jaleel White, once known only as Urkel, became the face of a powerful movement. He appeared on The Breakfast Club, Red Table Talk, The View, and CNN, not to promote a new show, not to plug a product, but to rip off the bandages covering decades of silence and abuse within Hollywood's child star system. "This isn't about me anymore," Jaleel told Gayle King during an interview. "This is about every kid who was told they were lucky just to be on TV, while grown men cash checks off their trauma. And now, thanks to public pressure, at least 2 major studios have announced they're reviewing their royalty policies for past child stars. But for Jaleel, this isn't about apologies or symbolic gestures. It's about real justice and making sure what happened to him never happens again."